Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to Too Many Games, and today we have our first video in a series looking at the game Epic Armageddon. I'm assuming if you've made it here, then you probably know something about Epic, but I thought the best place to start would be with an introductory video on what the game is, before I drill down into how to play and more of the rules. So what is Epic Armageddon? It's a tabletop war game fought between two players using miniatures, fighting over some objectives in order to win a battle. The game is decided by the strategies that the players will employ as they try to outwit each other in battle. It's a miniatures game. The miniatures used are 6mm in scale, so that means that all the infantry and vehicles and aircraft that you can use in the game are quite small compared to other games. But it also means that the scale of the battles can be on a grand scale, hence the name, Epic. Epic Armageddon was the last official release of the Epic system from the company that produced it, called Games Workshop, all the way back in 2003. It's set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe and uses the fluff from that game, but not the more recent fluff that you will see in that game if you're a fan. It uses the lore that was around probably about 15, maybe 20 years ago for the most part. It's a game of huge fighting titans and mass units of infantry and tanks and vehicles, flyers, artillery, and you even have the opportunity for some spaceships to be bombarding the battlefield. There are a few games before it that were of the same style in the same type of system, and they were Adeptus Titanicus, Space Marine, Titan Legions, Epic 40,000, and then finally they came to Epic Armageddon. The game is no longer officially supported by Games Workshop, but there is an online community that support it, and there are different rule sets and army lists out there for it. Models are a bit harder to source as a result, with it not being supported anymore. Lots of people resort to 3D printing models. It is possible to buy some second-hand and also proxy models from other companies that are producing 6mm miniatures. I'll probably end up doing some videos on these at a later date. The rules. Originally there were two rulebooks available. The main rulebook and the Swordwind expansion. Also the Swordwind expansion. Physical copies of these. But they are pretty hard to come by. Physical copies. However, the rules are these days without paying through them, along with the army lists that you'll need to play the game. We'll be looking at what's available at Net Epic Armageddon, and I'll link that in the description below. They have online versions and also PDF versions of both the rules with the FAQs included and the army lists as well. The online version of the rules is great if you are interested in playing, because it lets you have that available during a game and search through to find keywords or the rules that you might need. And you will have to reference those rules mid-game, it just happens. The army lists on Net Epic Armageddon are the current official/unofficial army lists, but they've updated points and rules to the units. It's a great starting resource if you're just trying to see what's out there, what army you might like to actually play and invest in. There are other versions of Epic and Epic Armageddon out there, but we will be looking at these ones that come from the Net Epic Armageddon website. So in these videos for Epic Armageddon, I want to go through the rules of play and provide an easy way for people to learn the game if they don't like sitting and reading a big, long rule book. I'll go through the rules bit by bit in a number of videos and hopefully give you a bit of an idea how to play the game. But since this is an introduction and you may not know if you want to play Epic Armageddon, let's weigh up some pros and cons to try and help you work that out. We'll start with the pros. If you like 40k or sci-fi, then you'll probably like the models and the aesthetic in Epic Armageddon. In fact, if you like 40k, I guarantee that you'll like the aesthetic. If you want a game with larger scale battles than what other miniatures games might provide, then this is for you. Particularly if you do like lots of infantry and vehicles on the table, and that idea of combined arms allowing for support from spacecraft or aircraft or drop ships dropping troops in, etc., etc. While it's officially unsupported now, it does have an active community, and there are forums and sites with the rules and list updates that happen quite frequently, so it is well supported still by the community. I personally think that it feels fun and fast-paced, particularly when you have your formations closing on the enemy and there are these decisive clashes and actions. in the game, making it feel very cinematic as you play it out. I also find it personally engaging the way that it makes you think. It's not only the tactics that you might employ on the battlefield as you respond to your opponent and what they're doing, but also in your list creation before the game even begins. And connected to that, but lastly, I've played a number of games and I feel as though I've only explored about 5% of what I could with regards to my tactics and the army creation of the game. So they're all the good, I think, with Epic Armageddon, but what about the bad? What about the cons? As I said, it is unsupported. So no new models, no new rules generally. There aren't any books that are going to get released each month. And you're not going to be able to have that flow of new things being released. I mean, things do change. Things are updated, but not as quickly as it would be if it was a supported game. Players can be hard to find, particularly when compared to other game systems, and that's just due to the age of the game and the fact that it's not supported. It can be a long game, I won't lie in that, but a lot of tabletop war games are pretty long sometimes, so you're not usually done in 45 minutes. It is linked to how big a game you want to play too, but if you play a bigger game, they do take a number of hours. And I also think although it's fairly simple at its core with how the game flows, there are still a lot of rules and a lot of stats on your units that you got to learn, and it is quite a steep learning curve, particularly if you're starting out in tabletop war games or gaming in general. And with those in mind, I'll leave it to you to work out if this is something that fits for you or something that you're interested in. Let's have a look at what you need to play, though. So if you are interested in and want to start out and you've grabbed a copy of the rules, what do you actually need to invest in to start? Firstly, there are the miniatures. You'll need to source them, to buy, to print, to borrow, whatever you may do for both yourself and also your opponent. You can start with a small game requiring much less, obviously, but like with most games, your collection will grow to a much larger size if you enjoy it. Buying models can be tricky. There are some companies that produce 6mm models that are appropriate and can fit into the setting. Buying on the second-hand market is an option too, but generally eBay has some ridiculous prices, so it's hard to get a good deal on there. But you can locate some decent deals on some of the forums. Overall, it is pricey if you want to buy miniatures for it, unless you're interested in 3D printing. And 3D printing is a real good option, I think, for Epic. If you have the ability or you know someone out there who has the ability to print them for you, there's lots of different STL files available, mainly for free as well. And it's a great way to actually see about playing Epic with a brand new army that you can just print out for the fraction of a price of a second-hand army. Secondly, you do need terrain and a table to put it on. Generally, you'll probably play on a space that is 6 foot long or 180 centimeters by 4 foot wide or about 120 centimeters. But you and your opponent, you can agree to a different size table if you just got a smaller table at home. But you will need to populate that table with different terrains to make it look good, but also to provide some tactical decisions during the battle. It's no fun if it's just an open flat board. Terrain ideas for things you might want to have on your board might be buildings and ruins and forests, hills, rivers, roads, fences. Could have industrial complexes, things like that. Pretty much anything that will help break up the openness of the board. And there's rules for a lot of those types of terrain, as we'll see in a future video. I generally prefer to have some terrain that's going to obscure the view completely, but then along with that, different terrain that will affect movement, different terrain that might give infantry the option to take cover in, and just little bits and pieces of terrain along the way to provide some partial cover. Make it interesting with a whole lot of different types of terrain. We'll discuss that more when we get to the tournament rules section in the rulebook later, in a later video. My advice is don't stack one type of terrain that clearly advantages one army or play style. And my other piece of advice always with terrain is try and collect terrain and try and use that terrain in a way that makes sense. Try and set it up not just as a random mishmash of things, but try and create, a city over here and a forest over here, and make it flow nicely. It'll just have a much nicer aesthetic. All right, thirdly, you do need a tape measure. You need a way of checking ranges and distances in the game. I recommend a nice lightweight tape measure, just in case you drop it on the table. Only needs to be a few meters in length at most. And it's probably a great time to mention too that the game is played using the metric system. So sorry to all our Imperial friends around the world, but you do need to use centimeters as opposed to inches. Fourthly, like a lot of tabletop war games, you'll need dice, namely 6-sided dice, and generally they'll be referred to as D6. Probably have at least 10 of them for a game, but I usually have 2 to 3 times that amount just ready, just in case there's a big attack roll that I need to do. I also recommend some different colored dice and some dice with different number of sides on them too. And that's mainly to differentiate dice that you want to use for attacking and for rolling things like the initiative, with other dice that you may want to track information in game with. You might need, for example, dice to track the number of wounds left on a particular model, or the number of blast markers that a formation has on it. So I usually have some 12-sided dice or some 20-sided dice that I use as well. Fifthly, you do need some templates. This is a little bit trickier than the other things, because you can just cut them out of paper if you need to, and use that until you find a better option. But you do need 2 circular templates in the game. One will have to be 7.4 centimeters in diameter, which is close to 3 inches, and another 12 centimeters in diameter, which is about 5 inches. And a lot of people do use the old Warhammer templates, as shown here. But yeah, generally the smaller one is more essential in the game. It's used a lot more often, so that's critical that you do have one of them for the game. And last but not least, you need something to represent blast markers that formations will accumulate in the game as you play. You can have tokens or markers that stay with the formation as they move around, but honestly, most people track it via dice, and it's just easier to have one single die with a unit tracking the blast markers. Say it's got 10, 15 blast markers on it. It's just a lot easier than having 15 tokens go around with the unit. So that pretty much covers everything in this first introductory video for Epic Armageddon. Thanks for watching, and join me in the next video as we start to look at how the game plays and some of the basic ideas of the game. See you next time on Too Many Games.